Welcome to Ethical Point. I'm your mentor, and alongside our resident skeptic, we're going to unpack the most complex, high-yield topics from the UPSC syllabus. Today, we are focusing squarely on General Studies Paper 4. We're doing a deep dive into the anatomy of corruption and the administrative reforms we desperately need to fight it.
That's right. If you're a focused learner aiming for the civil services, this explainer is designed directly for you. We're moving way past the basic textbook definitions and looking at the real structural friction of modern administration.
And to kick things off, let's start with this absolutely incredible quote from Kautilya. He said, "It is impossible for a person engaged in revenue collection not to taste the honey on the tip of his tongue." It really makes you wonder, is human nature just inherently prone to corruption? Are we literally fighting a losing battle before we even take the oath of office?
It's a super provocative thought, and honestly, it sets the stage perfectly for us. Kautilya recognized that honesty isn't always this natural, lifelong state. Sometimes it just needs to be strictly enforced. So let's dive into this and see exactly how we can enforce it in the modern world.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We've got a 6-part agenda. We're going to start by decoding corruption, then contrast the Hegelian ego with citizen centricity. After that, we'll see how Kautilya meets modern admin, tackle the whistleblower's dilemma, look at structural and tech reforms, and finally, wrap the whole thing up with a UPSC mains masterclass.
All right, Section 1, Decoding Corruption, moving beyond the coercive to the collusive.
Now, when most people think of corruption, they think of a citizen being forced to pay a bribe just to get a basic service. We call that coercive corruption. But how has the nature of corruption actually evolved in modern India? It's not just about simple extortion anymore, is it? Not at all. We've seen a massive rise in what's known as collusive bribery. Let's pause for a quick layman's definition here. Unlike traditional extortion, where the citizen is a victim, collusive bribery is a willing, completely secret partnership. Both the bribe giver, often a large corporation, and the public authority voluntarily collude to loot public resources, like spectrum or coal, for mutual gain. This is supply-side corruption, and let me tell you, it is far more damaging to our national economy.
Okay, let's make this real for an aspiring civil servant. Imagine you are a newly posted district magistrate. You discover a hypothetical yet highly realistic scenario. Local contractors and your own departmental officials are secretly splitting funds meant for a major district development project. How do you actually handle this kind of ethical friction?
Well, first, you have to realize the impacts of this friction are devastating. It degrades infrastructure quality and leads to completely meritless decision-making where contracts just go to the most corrupt, not the most competent. To dismantle this, you need immediate, practical steps. One major solution actually developed by Transparency International is implementing integrity pacts. This is a binding contractual agreement between the government and bidders that explicitly prohibits bribery. And you combine that with rigorous open audits to expose the hidden money trail.
Skeptic, moving right along to Section 2. Hegelian ego versus citizen centricity, dismantling the colonial mindset.
So, when officials engage in that kind of grand collusion, they often act as if they're totally untouchable. Where does this psychological root of bureaucratic arrogance even come from? Why do some civil servants feel they are just fundamentally above the very people they serve?
That arrogance stems directly from the Hegelian perspective. The philosopher Hegel actually argued that civil servants represent a universal interest, that their power is essentially a mission sanctioned by God, placing them entirely above the individual citizen. It's a very colonial, elitist mindset. For a modern India, we absolutely must dismantle this and replace it with a citizen-centric approach. That means the civil service is seen purely as a system of accountability, transparency, and public welfare. Nothing more, nothing less.
Which brings us to Section 3. Kautilya meets modern administration. Ancient philosophy applied to modern HR.
We hear a lot about ancient Indian philosophy and ethics papers, but Kautilya wrote the Arthashastra back in the 3rd century BC. Does an ancient text really hold any practical, actionable value for today's complex district offices?
Oh, absolutely it does. It's wild. Kautilya cataloged 40 different kinds of corruption back then. He famously said that detecting a corrupt official embezzling funds is like trying to identify whether a fish is drinking water when it's completely surrounded by it. It's nearly impossible to see, but his ancient principle of heavily monitoring superintendents directly maps to our modern institutional checks, things like integrity pacts, and especially the 360-degree review.
And let me just give you a layman's definition of this modern equivalent.
A 360-degree review isn't just your boss grading your performance. It's a complete evaluation system that gathers inputs from your superiors, your peers, your subordinates, and crucially, the external citizens you serve. It is a highly feasible, brilliant way to measure a civil servant's true impact and catch that fish drinking water by looking at the official from literally every possible angle.
Okay, Section 4, the Whistleblower's Dilemma, the Human Cost of Ethics.
Let's pivot to the human cost for a second. Kautilya talked about rewarding informants, but let's be real. In modern India, the personal and professional stakes for an officer who decides to speak up against corruption are immense. It's not just some theory on a page, it's a matter of life and death.
Sadly, you hit the nail on the head. We have to ground our ethical theory in the tragic realities of heroes like Satyendra Dubey, who exposed corruption in the NHAI Golden Quadrilateral Project, and Shanmugam Manjunath. Both of these men paid the ultimate price for their honesty. Exposing the truth without ironclad systemic protection carries severe physical risks. That is exactly why the UN Convention Against Corruption mandates strong, non-negotiable legal frameworks to protect these individuals.
Right, and even if they somehow survive physically, there's a devastating professional and mental cost to speaking out. Yes, and this leads to what we call gaslighting in an administrative context. In plain English, this is when the corrupt institution turns the tables on the truth teller. It's a prolonged, retaliatory assault on the whistleblower's career. We're talking bogus departmental inquiries, punitive transfers, complete isolation. It leads to severe psychological distress and total professional ruin. It's literally the system punishing honesty.
Let's look at Section 5, Structural Reforms in Tech Solutions, Actionable Strategies for the Civil Service.
If the human cost is really that high, we obviously can't just rely on individual bravery. We need systemic fixes. So put on your hat as a seasoned government advisor for a moment. If you were reviewing our anti-corruption strategy, what structural reforms would you demand? To protect civil servants from immense political pressure and sever that unholy nexus between corrupt politicians and vulnerable bureaucrats, we need definitive structural defenses. First, a comprehensive public service code to clearly define ethical boundaries so there's no gray area. Second, the separation of policy formulation from daily operations to limit direct interference. Third, and this is absolutely crucial, addressing political corruption at the root through the state funding of elections, just like the Indrajit Gupta Committee suggested. And finally, the proactive public disclosure of political assets to ensure total transparency across the board.
Okay, but what about right down at the local district level? What actionable, technological interventions can bypass human weakness right there in the office? We absolutely need to build in robust tech solutions. I strongly recommend 3 highly specific interventions here. Number 1, e-governance. By moving public services online, we drastically minimize direct human discretion, meaning there are far fewer opportunities for an official to demand a bribe. Number 2, 24/7 digital file tracking, so we know exactly whose desk a delayed file is sitting on. And number 3, top-level grievance redressal platforms, like the Pragati platform, which directly connect a citizen's complaint to the highest levels of accountability. It's a real game changer.
And finally, Section 6, the UPSC Mains Answer Masterclass. Let's translate this theory into high scores.
This is where we bring it all home for our focused learners tuning in. How should an aspirant package all this dense knowledge into a high-scoring 10 or 15 marker for GS Paper 4? We need a solid intro, a great body, and a powerful conclusion. For a stellar introduction, I want you to memorize this exact quote from Thomas Macaulay in 1835. "I have traveled across the length and breadth of India, and I have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief, such high moral values." Using this quote powerfully contrasts India's immense historical moral wealth and spiritual heritage with the modern crisis of corruption. It instantly shows the examiner you understand the historical trajectory of our ethical standards.
Love that hook. And what about the conclusion? The crucial point for a GS Paper 4 conclusion is to end with a highly actionable way forward. You can use this exact template on exam day. Argue for the enactment of a formal Public Service Act. Push for the integration of e-governance to severely limit human discretion. Call for a cultural shift from that colonial Hegelian ego over to a citizen-centric mindset. And finally, emphasize the strict implementation of the Whistleblowers Protection Act of 2014 to actually safeguard our honest officers. It provides a highly structured, pragmatic end to your answer.
That is a brilliant framework.
But I want to leave our audience with a final provocative thought to chew on. If we actually do successfully integrate total e-governance and strip away all human discretion, can technology entirely replace the need for human ethics and administration? Now that's a fascinating question. Look, technology can definitely force compliance, but true public service requires empathy, compassion, and a moral compass that no algorithm can ever replicate. Thank you for joining us on this explainer. Keep structuring your knowledge, keep practicing those answers, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.